I wanted to start off by thanking the University of Alberta and also for Jennifer and Riza to organize this. This is really like the who's who of cutting edge research in Chinese NGOs. I feel like looking out here, you are my bibliography for my last two articles. I mean, this is amazing. This is really, really fabulous, and it's a great honor to be here. And I know you are sick and tired of hearing papers at this point, and I will do my best to stay on time and get through it so we can get to the fun bit of the discussion. My paper is on the China Youth Development Foundation, CYDF, which runs Project Hope. Y'all know what it is, right? This is like the biggest charitable thing, whatever it is. It's the biggest one of it in China, right? And the title is it a GONGO? Actually, following Patricia Thurton, it would be a Pongo, right? It's a party organized, not a government. Or is it what I call the GENGO, a government exploiting NGO? I mean, what exactly is a GONGO or a Pongo? It's that fabulous oxymoronic tongue twister, right? A government-organized, non-government organization. And although there have been a lot of theoretical frameworks that look at the relationship between state and NGOs and between GONGOs or Pongos and NGOs, many of which have been done by my brilliant colleagues here in this room, they all tend to assume that if an NGO has close and entangling, has a relationship with the state has the upper hand and more power. Now, there's a really good reason to think this, and I agree with all of you that that makes a lot of sense when you're looking at China. But I think what I'm trying to do in this paper is to pull back a little bit from the focus on the power of the party state in China and the way it constrains and limits NGOs, and instead look at how things might look from the perspective of the NGO, looking at the state, looking at the government, looking at the party as something it can use to achieve its own ends. So from this perspective, from the perspective of the NGO or the organization, looking at this party state, it is, of course, not a monolithic organization, but as Jennifer pointed out in her talk, layers and spaces, right? A loosely affiliated group of agents and organizations with sometimes overlapping and sometimes competing concerns. They didn't need to read Jennifer's paper. I mean, some of the people who run these NGOs, they know this because they used to work at these places. And because of that, even if you're a GONGO or a Pongo, you were not founded by the state. You were founded by one particular office or group of people in the state, right? And because of that, you have differing relationships with the other groups and people in the state. And in some cases, you have more power than them, and sometimes you have less power than them, right? And from the perspective of the NGO, this conglomerate of offices and actors that makes up the Chinese party state can be seen as a potential cornucopia of resources that you could use. It could give material resources, not just money, but office space. It can provide labor and talent, publicity, legitimacy. If you do it right, it's one-stop shopping to extract what you need out of the party state. But of course, to be able to extract these resources out of the party state, you need to be able to give something in return, right? You need to be able to pay something to whoever to get what you need. Fortunately, party state organizations are also organizations. And from an organizational standpoint, they also have some of the same issues that all organizations have, which is they also need to keep a stream of resources to survive. And in an era of a shrinking party state, that's not a joke, right? There are many, if not the majority of areas of the Chinese government and the Chinese party, you're looking at local bureaus, departments, offices that are really worried about being able to maintain their status to be able to extract resources from the administration or whatever layers above them. So in order to avoid budget cuts and downsizing, party state organizations have to be able to offer their funders, the rest of the government, what in organizational sociology we call a persuasive institutional account, right? DiMaggio and Powell, that an institutional account is what a business or organization or university needs to be able to offer to secure resources. It is, I'm going to read it. It's an argument that the organization produces It's an argument that the organization produces desirable and important services using reliable and legitimate and innovative methods. This is what we all claim our schools do, or our institutes do, and it's what every business is trying to claim that it does. NGOs can offer a government office. They can basically provide them with a persuasive institutional account. NGOs can both create the need for a service by publishing a social problem, and then they can provide the state organization with a method to address that social problem by partnering with the NGO that makes that organization look good, like it's doing something important in society. So this research is part of a larger data set on 26 NGOs. Today I'm only talking about one organization, CYDF. And for that one, we've got interviews from 2004 to 2008 with its founder, its leader after 2008, 5 other administrators in Beijing, and also beneficiaries in 4 different provinces, Yunnan, Hunan, Heilongjiang, and Gansu. So schools there, all kinds of people at the schools, and all kinds of community members at competing schools. So it's a big bunch of interviews. But I'm going to focus on only a few. Okay, so of course CYDF is not a typical whatever it is, Pongo, Gongo, whatever, right? It is uncommonly large, it's uncommonly successful. But it's because of its success, I think that it's interesting and important in this case because of mimetic isomorphism, right? That if it's true that organizations will often pattern themselves after other existing organizations to try and survive, that's a common, thank you for explaining all that so I don't have to. You're not going to pick any organization. You're going to pick a successful one, right? You're going to pick one that you know. NGOs may not know very much about each other, but they all know about this one, right? So as something that forms patterns, the first biggest NGOs were all gongos, right? I mean, so this is, if you're looking at Springbud, if you're looking at All China Women's Foundation, or if you're looking at CYDF. It's not to say that there aren't also grassroots organizations emerging at the same time, but they're not the ones that you would pattern yourself after because other people don't know about them because they're small. These are large and successful. I have other, I'm not going to talk about this, I have other NGOs in my data set that I would argue are using the same patterns after CYDF. And there are other data sets that also show that. Let's see. So it offers a template, a model that other organizations can use. So what is that model? Step 1. The organization, the NGO, creates a moral panic. You guys know what that is? It's a sociological term by Cohen. A moral panic is when you get everybody in society to freak out about some social problem. It's like The Simpsons. Is it time to panic, right? And it might be about, like, I don't know, the crack, epidemic, or it's about bullying, right? If you're in the United States right now, everybody's complaining about bullying, like it's really going to wreck America or something. So it's something that you get, like, lots of publicity, lots of media, lots of officials have to talk about it. That's a moral panic. There's a big theory about it. We'll talk about it if you want to. NGOs create a moral panic by drawing public attention to a social problem through mass media, if possible. Step 2, offer an office, bureau, department, or a group of people in the party state a way to engage with this social problem that will allow them to look concerned, moral, dignified, effective, and really important for the social good. These activities should coincidentally serve the interests of the NGO. So to go back to Jessica and Marta's paper, this is what I meant about being innovative before you go to the state, even though, I know you guys were talking about something else. Step 3, use the support of the party state agency or office to build the NGO and also continue to help publicize this social problem as really important, to society. Make the NGO increasingly useful and even indispensable to that party state. And this, therefore, gives the party state agency an incentive to both publicize the social problem and to protect the NGO from interference from other aspects of the state to which it has power to do so, up to the level at which it has power to do so. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about how CYDF has done this as a case study. So I'm going to talk about how it does this at the national level, and then the provincial level, and then maybe if I have time at the local level, or maybe not. At the national level, there's 2 versions about the founding of CYDF. The first version is Kang Xiaoguang's, and I think he's right. I'm not saying he's wrong about this, and it's cited by most China scholars about about it, which is that the Central Committee of the Chinese Youth League sets up CYDF with approval from the Communist Party's Central Committee. The Youth League provides CYDF with its initial operating budget, some offices, its initial staff, including one of its own cadres, Xu Yongguang, as its leader, okay? The reason the Youth League does this, the reason why it creates CYDF, is to explicitly address threats to the Youth League, right? This is the late 1980s, and it's 10 years after the reforms. What exactly is the Youth League doing in China? Like, what is it doing that's important at all? In other words, the Youth League does not have a good institutional account anymore. It does not have a persuasive argument that it is creating an important product or service and that its methods are reliable and innovative and legitimate, right? It's having a problem. And so it creates CYDFs explicitly to address this problem. In this version, the Youth League creates CYDF and it owns it and it controls it and it exists for its purpose, right? It's dog, right? It's like, it's Pongo, right? In contrast, when I interviewed Xu Yongguang, he tells me this totally different story, right? He tells me that it's his organization, that he was moved by the plight of poor rural children. He decided to start the organization and he uses the Youth League to achieve his own goals. Now, the way to reconcile these two arguments is to say he's a delusional idiot trying to impress an American researcher, right? That would make much more sense, and that the other version, the GONGO version, is the one that's actually more accurate. Now, the problem with that, though, is that if you look at the history of this organization, and many people have studied it, actually in depth in China and elsewhere, what you see over and over again is that the CYDF has always been able to do what it wanted despite the state. And it has always managed to make the Youth League do what it wants it to do. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The Youth League is CYDF's supervisory agency. It has never interfered with CYDF's hiring, its management of its staff, its development of its program. It's never controlled any of its funds or fundraising. Come on, what's it doing, right? It also, at a certain point, at the request of CYDF, the Youth League created a supervisory office to supervise Project Hope funding, because there's a lot of money involved in this. That office was housed at CYDF, and all of its employees were funded by CYDF. That's some nice funding supervisory agent, you know, where it's under the control of the NGO. Nor has the Youth League been the only part of the government that has done what CYDF wanted. I can give you tons of examples, but the one I will give you now is that the media, the state-run media, has always been complicit in giving CYDF tons of great media exposure. You know, CYDF, Project Hope is famous for its campaign, its posters of those poor kids in black and white in those horrible rural schools. I mean, it's very good at creating visual materials, but it wouldn't have mattered if it was good at that if the state-run media hadn't been willing to publicize it. You know, tons and tons. And there's reason to believe the Ministry of Education actually told the state-run media not to do it because it was embarrassing, and they did it anyway. So for some reason, CYDF constantly gets to be able to do what it wants. Now, all of this begs the question, which is, why does the Youth League and other government organizations, why have they been willing to work for the benefit of CYDF? Now, part of the answer obviously has to do with Xu Yongguang himself, who is a great player and has lots of great connections and knows how to use guanxi like a master. But also, as we're going to see in the next section, it's because CYDF has offered the state a very good product, an institutional account, what it needed. By working with CYDF on Project Hope, the Youth League could adopt an institutional account for itself, thereby gaining legitimacy and a justification for demanding state resources. And since CYDF has always been financially self-supporting, it has always managed to do this at no cost, no financial cost to itself. But these benefits will only come to the Youth League if Project Hope and CYDF are successful, right? Not if it's not successful. Okay, so now let's move down to the provincial level, where I think I have probably more interesting results than what you guys all knew from about the national level. Even though CYDF maintains significant autonomy at the national level, it would be reasonable to assume that it would have a harder time to maintain autonomy at the provincial level for two reasons. First, because of government regulations, CYDF was not permitted to set up branches, provincial branches. Instead, every provincial branch running Project Hope is technically an independent organization that's not managed by CYDF. Second, y'all know this, Project Hope is run by the Youth League. When Xu Yongguang wanted to do Project Hope, he would have needed a gigantic staff all around the country in every single school district to identify poor kids, to get small amounts of money to them, right? And it would have been a huge infrastructural problem. And instead, he just outsourced it, right? Here we've got an outsourcing story again, but it's an opposite one, right? Where the NGO outsources to the government. So it outsourced all the local work to local youth league offices because they were already there. So on the local level, CYDF is utterly, totally dependent on the Youth League and the Ministry of Education to even run its programs, okay? But that's the only way it could run this national level, huge organization with about 55 people in Beijing. Yet, provincial level Youth League offices have never been able to take control of Project Hope, even though it has attempted to do so. It's actually different provinces have tried to capture Project Hope and run their own Project Hope campaigns, bypassing CYDF. And every time it's done that, the Central Youth League has come down on them, smushed them, told them they weren't allowed to do it, and that they had to do it through CYDF. Okay? One. Second, CYDF has managed to convince the Youth League and the Communist Party to agree that it holds all the funds for Project Hope. It controls all the money that goes to every province, every county, every village. So through that, it maintains control. Okay, but lastly, I think most importantly, these youth leagues are dependent on Project Hope to offer them important institutional accounts because they were also in very desperate straits. And we can see this from the experience of Gu Wei, who I interviewed in 2008 when he was the head of the Heilongjiang Youth Development Foundation, so the Heilongjiang provincial version of this organization running Project Hope. Gu began working for the Youth League in 1975. As a member of the propaganda department, he became increasingly frustrated throughout the 1980s. Young people were not interested in the Youth League, staff were leaving to start their own businesses. His description of the organization in the 80s is of a provincial youth league in crisis, right? Its services were not considered desirable or important by either the government or by the populace. And it wasn't just affecting the organization, it was affecting people working for the organization. So think about this in the economic level. To make it up the hierarchy of the party-state ladder bureaucracy as a person, you need to have lists of accomplishments. That's how you make it up the ladder. If you worked for the Youth League in the 1980s, nothing you were doing looked like an accomplishment. So you were stuck. It forced you not to, your own career was in jeopardy because of this. So in 1988, the Heilongjiang Youth League decided to try and solve this problem by starting a market venture, a business, a firm that would make money and then fund projects for the Youth League. Gu volunteered to take charge of this new venture, and so he's got a firm that's supposed to make money, the Heilongjiang Qinglong Economic and Technological Development Corporation, and then he's got this foundation that's supposed to hold the money and then use it for the Youth League. And over the next 4 years, he experiences mixed success. The business makes enough money to keep itself afloat, but never makes a big pile of money. It never has a business identity. They make money piecemeal in an ad hoc manner. They never manage to fund any really interesting projects for the Youth League. And that's both because they never really made tons of money, but also because nobody had any good ideas about what cool projects to do. 2 quotes from him. One is, I found running a business was full of hardship. Remember that, Timothy, with your people. And then he said, "We are not businessmen." And then the other thing he said was that it never occurred to them to try and serve vulnerable populations like Project Hope did. It just never crossed their mind. They didn't know what to do with it. So basically, Gu Wei and Xu Yongguang had exactly the same problem. They were given the same problem to solve. But Gu's struggles and difficulties trying to deal with it was very different and actually much more common than Xu Yongguang's success with Project Hope. So Gu I mean, he was intelligent, he was ambitious, he's a really cool guy, but this is not an easy thing to do, right? So in 1992, he comes to the conclusion the best way to save the Heilongjiang Youth League is to franchise Project Hope. So he gets on a plane, flies to Beijing, and asks Xu Yongguang whether or not Heilongjiang province can have its own Project Hope, whether or not they can start their own youth development foundation and do it. And it's, I mean, really it's a franchise because he has to pay them for it. There's a fee. And he has to follow all it's like having a KFC or a McDonald's or something like that. And I asked him why he did this instead of just creating a knockoff. And he said, well, even by 1992, Project Hope had become a well-known brand name, right? Like, why would we compete with that? So CYDF has been dependent on provincial youth leagues to carry out their work, but provincial youth leagues have been dependent on Project Hope because they were not able to come up with institutional accounts to save them themselves. And so using Project Hope was the way to solve its problem. As long as CYDF controlled Project Hope, it held a strong position with provincial youth leagues. By 2009, CYDF had raised billions of RMB, served millions of students, built tens of thousands of schools. It had successfully transformed state behavior. Before 1989, you could argue that actually nobody in China, in the government or in cities really cared about rural education. 20 years later, it's considered a major social problem that every politician has to be responsible for. The government not only reacted, in 2007 and 2008, the government reacted to this by actually investing a huge amount of money, getting rid of all rural school fees, injecting a ton of money into school construction, and this is actually before the earthquake. Okay, so it actually did what CYDF was trying to accomplish all these years by seriously investing in rural education. Ironically, CYDF itself may have been undermined by its own success. The new education policies removed the need for Project Hope, right? There you go. Regovernmentalization, right, Carla? Right here, because it's the Ministry of Education now doing these things. And since 2009, honestly, CYDF has kind of gone down into it. Or you can argue that CYDF accomplished exactly what it wanted to accomplish, right? It met its social goals. Rural kids are being served much better than ever. And maybe this is exactly what an NGO accomplishes when it exploits the government. It transformed the government. It transforms society. It offers a new path for citizenship to push out the government. I don't know if that's bad. Anyway, things to think about. Thank you. Sorry for the